between the two, Ambedkar argued that can we really compare the two? And then argue that really there can be a process of revolution which will create a modernity. So Ambedkar could get that what is the similarity between the two? Because they are historically two apart personalities, at least 2,500 years gap is there, and yet there is a possibility of comparison. Ambedkar said yes, there are four at least important similarities. There are four important similarities between Marx and Buddha. One, the function of philosophy is to reconstruct the world and not to waste its time in explaining the origin of the world. So reconstruction is an important aspect of philosophy which is equal in Marx as well as in Ambedkar. The second aspect is that there is a conflict of interest between class and cloth. So class interest is there. The third aspect is that private property is basically, responsible for the exploitation, and it brings sorrow to the masses. So third element. And fourth, it is necessary for the good of the society that the sorrows be removed by the abolition of private property. So both of them agree. But where did they differ? Ambedkar tried to argue. What is the difference between Marx and? So Marx talks about, or Marxist talks about that yes, history making project can be achieved through violence, one, and two, through dictatorship of proletariat. But it is here that Ambedkar talked about that Buddha is not talking about a proletariat revolution. Buddha is also not talking about he's also not talking about violence. Buddha is talking about a voluntary change of moral imposition of individual revolution or individualist revolution. There has to be a moral change within this, and therefore he gives three very important paths to achieve that. One is, of course, that you have to have 5 vows, that is Panchshila, that starting from not hurting to even the plant or ecology or the human beings, to actually not even stealing, taking liquor, entering into lascivious activities and so on and so forth. So these 5 shilas have to be practiced by the individual. But not only this, there is also 8-fold path that has to be also brought in, and starting from right speech to right occupation and even right exercise, the physical exercises, vyayam, is also required. So this 8-fold path, and along with that there are, you have to achieve Nibbana. That means that there are 10 hurdles. 10 hurdles before you really achieve it. Now, I am arguing this case because I am a votary of multiple modernities. I don't believe that there is only a source of Western modernity and there are no sources of other modernities. If the cardinal principle values are there, then actually there may be multiple sources of modernity, and even our social scientists from Durkheim, Weber and Marx have talked about only different shades of modernity. Even first world modernity, second world modernity, and quote unquote the third world modernity, they all have different sources. They have different sources. If you see, the first world modernity came out of industrial revolution, the second world modernity came out of ideological revolution, and the third world modernity has come out of revolution against colonialism. Now, if they have different sources of modernity, then actually what we have to look into that were there really different sources of modernity which existed before the scientific revolution also. So I just want to drag the time a little bit further, not to restricting only to 15th century, since when the project of modernity starts. I want to say that if you really want to search these values were present in the history as well, and we have to look into those alternative sources of modernity. If there are multiple traditions, how can there be a modernity? There have to be multiple modernities also. After all, people are not passive recipient. They're not recipient at all. And therefore, I think there is a case for understanding a different source of modernity through Ambedkar when he compares Buddha with Karl Marx. Now, this brings me to his project of nation building. The last point is that Ambedkar was few of the leaders of his time who talked about that India was not a nation. And he quoted national poet Ravidass. He said, and he quotes, and I quote him, even national poet of Bengal doesn't think that India is a nation. India is nation in the making. And this he has said throughout from 1927 onwards. You can read it. Ambedkar was trying to argue that we are not a nation. We are nation in the making. And he quotes Rabindranath Tagore, he talks Anglo-Indians and many people. And he said, let me quote for you. Speaking on 26th November 1949 in the Constituent Assembly, when the final copy of the Constitution was supposed to be handed over, Ambedkar argued in the assembly, and I quote, politically minded Indian resented the expression, the people of India. They preferred the expression, the Indian nation. I am of the opinion that in believing that we are a nation, we are cherishing a great delusion. As late as 1955, when the movement for the separate linguistic state was going on, Ambedkar opined, and I quote again, the nature of Union of Indian expresses only an idea. It is not indicative of an achievement. We have to go a long way to become a United States of India. The Union of India is far, far away from the United States of India. This is Ambedkar in 1955. So why Ambedkar thinks that India is not a nation at that time? And he argues that how can a nation be divided in several thousand of castes be a nation? As we, in his own opinion, the castes are anti-national. In the first place, because they bring about separation in the social life. They are anti-national also because they generate jealousy and antipathy between caste and caste, unquote. Going further, he highlighted the fact that there is an utter lack among the Hindus what the sociologists call as consciousness of kind. And therefore, there is no consciousness of kind in every Hindu. If there is a consciousness, that consciousness is of caste. And therefore, Hindus cannot make or set to form a society or a nation. Therefore, he suggested we should overcome all of these difficulties if we really want to become a nation. Now, if that is the case, Ambedkar argued that if the people are divided into caste and caste, what about Hindus and Muslims during that period? How did Hindus and Muslims exist? Ambedkar also analyzed the relationship between Hindus and Muslims by asking the question, are there enough affinities between Hindus and Muslims to continue as a nation? He cautioned, are there any common historical antecedents which Hindus and Muslims can be said to share together as a matter of pride and as a matter of sorrow? That is the question which the Hindus must answer. And he argued that as far as icons are concerned, Hindus revere Prithviraj Chauhan, Rana Pratap and Shivaji in history, and Muslims revere likes of Muhammad bin Qasim, Aurangzeb. In religious faith, the Hindus draw inspiration from Ramayana, Mahabharata and Gita. The Muslims derive inspiration from Quran and Hadith, and therefore common features and shared history is lacking. And therefore, he said that we have to understand what exactly is a nation. It is not conglomeration of people only. And he quotes Ernest Renan. Ernest Renan defined nation as a living soul, a spiritual principle. Two things which in truth are but one constitute the soul. This is spiritual principle. One is the past, the other is the present. One is the common possession of rich heritage of memories, and the other is actual consent, the desire to live together, the will to preserve worthily the undivided inheritance which has been handed over to them. The nation is like the individual. It is the outcome of long past of efforts, the sacrifices, devotion, a heroic past, great men, glory. These are the social capital upon which nations are built. And therefore, Ambedkar was very, very clear that the commonality, the suffering in common doesn't exist, because he thinks that suffering in common is a greater bond of union of joy than joy. As regards to national memories, moorings are worth more than triumph. And therefore, if really India wants to be a nation, then they have to come together, they have to forget their past, and they have to forget their own icons. They have to create a common heritage. Now, if Ambedkar had given this idea, so how then a nation has to be built? Now, it is here that Ambedkar was very much for establishing the rights of the erstwhile deprived communities, especially the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, the minorities, as well as women. So these four categories Ambedkar identified that they have to be given self-representation. Without self-representation, there cannot be a process of nation building. Now, I will just take one example to prove the point that why exactly he was trying to argue about the self-representation. And I take the example of Dalits, the scheduled caste, the ex-untouchables, that why he was asking self-representation for them. Ambedkar argued that there are three very important reasons for self-representation. And he quoted John Stuart Mills, who had argued that, a good government is not that only gives the representation to the aspirations of the people. A good government is that which gives self-representation also. So only the representation of aspiration will not qualify to make a government a good government. There has to be self-representation also. Why? Because government is a very, very important space to harness your capabilities and capacities. Second, Ambedkar said that if you really want to have a democratic society, then the rulers should give up their rights, and the ruled should also get the right to frame the law. It is not always that the rulers will keep on making law for the ruled. If that is the case, then there will not be democracy. So the rulers should also know that what is the pain of getting ruled. So it is not only one-sided that rulers will make rules and ruled will always be having the rules. So this will only, make one group as the rulers and others will always remain ruled. But this situation should change, and therefore you need self-representation. last but not the least, Ambedkar said that self-representation is also a moral question. Moral question. And he quoted Gopal Krishna Gokhale. He quoted Gopal Krishna Gokhale. Gopal Krishna Gokhale had given a representation. Gopal Krishna Gokhale, one of the towering leaders of India's freedom struggle, had given a representation to British bureaucracy for asking that the British bureaucracy is not giving representation to Indians in the British bureaucracy. I'm talking about the time of 1885 when the Public Services Commission of India had come and Indians were asking for their representation in the British bureaucracy. So the memorandum says that the British is not giving representation to Indians and therefore dwarfing and stunting of Indian is taking place. The Indians are not able to achieve their total manhood. They are not able to harness their capability and capacities. Ambedkar drew a straight line and argue that, okay, the British have come only 150 years